Some stories don't begin with chaos. They don't begin with fire, sirens, or headlines. They begin quietly, in homes that look like every other home, on mornings that feel no different from the ones before. On the outside, nothing is wrong. And that is what makes them dangerous. Because when something impossible happens without warning, the human mind has no defense. On September 18th, 2024, in New York City, a 5-year-old boy woke up screaming at exactly 5:42 a.m. Not crying, not confused, screaming, as if he had been pulled violently out of a place he wasn't supposed to leave. Within hours, his parents would realize their son was no longer speaking like a child. Within days, doctors would admit they could not explain what they were seeing. Within weeks, priests, psychologists, linguists, and researchers would all be drawn into the same question. How can a child know things he has never learned? But this story does not ask you to believe. It asks you to listen. Because every claim that follows was documented, recorded, analyzed. There were drawings, languages, medical tests, eyewitnesses, and finally, a man who appeared, healed, spoke, and vanished. A man with scars no accident could explain. A man who refused worship. A man who insisted he was only a carpenter. And at the center of it all, a child who never asked for attention, never asked for fame, never asked to be believed. He only said one thing, over and over again. He never left. And I have to find him. This is not a story about religion. It is a story about evidence that refuses to stay quiet. And it begins in a small bedroom on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. The Upper West Side was still asleep. Outside, the city moved slowly, like it always did before sunrise. Traffic lights changed for empty intersections. A delivery truck idled at the corner. Somewhere far below, the subway hummed beneath layers of concrete. Inside the Morgan family's townhouse, everything was still. Emily Morgan slept lightly, the way most parents of young children do, always half aware, always listening for movement, footsteps, or a call from the next room. At 5:42 a.m., the scream cut through the house. It wasn't loud at first. It started sharp and sudden, then rose, raw, panicked, and sustained long enough to erase any doubt that this was not a dream. Emily was out of bed before she was fully awake. Her heart raced ahead of her thoughts as she ran barefoot down the hallway, already preparing herself for the familiar possibilities. A nightmare, a fall, a child waking disoriented in the dark. She reached Noah's bedroom door and pushed it open. And then she stopped. Noah was not in his bed. He was sitting on the floor. The overhead light was on. The blankets lay untouched, and the carpet was no longer visible. Sheets of paper covered nearly every inch of the floor, some neatly arranged, others overlapping, curling at the edges. Crayons were scattered among them, many worn down to the nub, their paper wrappers torn or missing entirely. Noah sat in the center of it all. His back was straight, his breathing was fast but controlled, and his hands were moving, not randomly, not frantically, with purpose. Emily felt a chill rise along her arms. Children draw messily, they scribble, they press too hard or too lightly. Noah did none of that. He held the crayon the way an adult would, between fingers, steady, precise. His strokes were deliberate, measured, confident. He was drawing a face, not a cartoon, not a child's interpretation, a face with depth, with structure, with shadow and proportion that suggested understanding, not guessing. Emily knelt beside him slowly, afraid that sudden movement might break whatever fragile state he was in. "Noah," she said gently. "Honey, what are you doing?" He didn't look up at first. He finished the line he was drawing, added a subtle shadow beneath an eye, and only then turned toward her. Tears streamed down his cheeks, but his expression wasn't fear, it was urgency. "Mum," he said quietly, his voice trembling but certain, "Jesus is already here." Emily froze. "He never left," Noah continued. "He's living among us, and I have to find him." For a moment, Emily could not speak. Her mind scrambled for explanations, dreams, imagination, something he'd heard at church. Children repeated things. They mixed stories with reality. She forced herself to stay calm. "Sweetheart," she said softly, brushing hair from his forehead. "Did you have a bad dream?" Noah shook his head immediately. "No," he said. "I was awake." He pointed to the papers surrounding him. "These are real people," he added. "They matter." Emily followed his finger. She picked up one of the drawings, then another, then another. Her stomach tightened. Each face was different. Different ages, different features, different expressions, but all of them were complete, finished, and unsettlingly adult. "These are very good," she said carefully. "Where did you learn to draw like this?" Noah looked at her, as if the question didn't make sense. "I didn't learn," he said. "I remember." Emily laughed weakly, trying to lighten the moment, trying to protect herself from the fear creeping up her spine. "Remember from where?" she asked. Noah's lower lip trembled. He pointed to one drawing in particular, a man in his early 30s, calm eyes, dark hair, a faint sadness in his expression. "That one?" Noah said. "That's him." Emily swallowed. "Him who?" Noah looked up at her fully now, and for the first time, Emily felt something she could not explain. It was not fear of her son. It was fear for him. "He doesn't want to be found," Noah whispered. "But God told me I have to look." Outside, the city continued waking up. Inside the house, the Morgan family crossed a line they could never return from. The change did not happen all at once. It unfolded quietly, over days, in ways that were easy to dismiss. At first, Noah stopped playing with his toys. The plastic dinosaurs stayed lined up on the shelf. The puzzle pieces remained untouched on the coffee table. His favorite cartoon played on the television, but his eyes never followed it. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table, or on the floor by the window, or on his bed, knees pulled to his chest, always drawing. Emily watched him carefully. Children sometimes fixate, she told herself. They go through phases. But this was different. Noah barely ate. He pushed food around his plate without noticing. When asked if he was hungry, he answered politely, but distantly, as if the question belonged to someone else's life. At night, he stopped asking for stories, stopped asking for the light to stay on. He would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, whispering sentences that felt too structured, too deliberate. Emily began writing them down. "He works with wood," Noah said one evening, without looking up from his drawing. "He doesn't charge people." "He refuses money when they offer it." Emily paused. "How do you know that?" she asked. Noah frowned, genuinely confused. "Because that's who he is," he replied. Another day, while Emily folded laundry, Noah spoke again, his voice calm, almost instructional. "He has scars on his hands," he said. "Right here." He pressed his small thumb into the center of his palm. "And on his feet," he added, "and he hides them." Emily's chest tightened. "Noah," she said carefully. "Who are you talking about?" He finally looked at her, not like a child seeking reassurance, but like someone surprised she didn't already understand. "The man I'm supposed to find." David Morgan noticed the change, too. At first, he tried to laugh it off. Kids said strange things. Religion mixed with imagination all the time. But then Noah said something David could not explain away. "He speaks an old language," Noah said during breakfast one morning. "Not English, not Latin." David looked up from his coffee. "What language, buddy?" Noah thought for a moment. "A broken one," he said. "People don't use it anymore." Emily and David exchanged a glance. Sunday school did not teach dead languages. That night, Noah woke up at exactly 3:21 a.m. Not crying. Not disoriented. He sat upright in bed and whispered, "He's telling me to keep searching." Emily rushed in, heart pounding. "Who's telling you?" she asked. Noah looked at her, exhausted. "The voice," he said. "It sounds kind, but sad." Emily held her son tightly, fighting the growing realization she refused to name. This was no phase, and whatever was happening to Noah, it was accelerating. By the end of the first week, Emily and David stopped debating whether something was wrong. They began debating how wrong it might be. Noah's routine no longer resembled that of a 5-year-old. He woke early, often before sunrise. He spoke less, but when he did, his words were deliberate, measured, and unsettlingly precise. And his drawings had changed. They were no longer just faces. They were studies, angles, expressions caught mid-thought, hands drawn with anatomical accuracy, tendons, proportions, subtle shadow where skin folds. David finally said what Emily had been afraid to admit. "We need a doctor." New York Presbyterian Hospital was less than 20 minutes away. On September 22nd, Noah sat quietly in the back seat as they drove, clutching a folder of drawings Emily insisted on bringing. He did not ask where they were going. He already knew. The pediatric specialist, Dr. Michael Carter, greeted them calmly. Mid-40s, measured voice, the kind of man trained to separate panic from pathology. For 3 hours he evaluated Noah. Cognitive tests, memory exercises, emotional response checks. Noah complied without resistance. He answered questions politely, completed tasks efficiently, displayed no signs of distress. Too little distress. "He's very calm," Dr. Carter remarked. "He's focused," Emily replied. Dr. Carter smiled faintly. "Some children are." Then he looked at the drawings. The smile disappeared. He studied them silently for several minutes. He turned one upside down, held another at arm's length, placed a third flat on the desk, tracing a line with his finger. "These aren't copied," he said quietly. "No," Emily replied. "He draws them from memory." Dr. Carter exhaled slowly. "These show advanced shading techniques," he said. "Spatial awareness, proportional consistency." He hesitated. "This level is not typical." David leaned forward. "What does that mean?" "It means," Dr. Carter said carefully, "that your son's motor control and visual processing exceed his chronological age by several years." "How many?" Emily asked. Dr. Carter paused. "At least 7, he said. The room fell silent. Dr. Carter completed the evaluation. No trauma, no hallucinations, no psychiatric disorder. Officially, Noah was healthy. But when the appointment ended, Dr. Carter walked them to the door himself. He lowered his voice. "I can't diagnose what I don't understand," he said. "But I suggest you document everything." Emily nodded. They had already started. As they left the hospital, Emily felt the weight of something settling over them. If medicine had no answers, then the answers were coming from somewhere else. Father Jonathan Hayes had learned, over decades of service, that belief was not the same as truth. He had seen people claim visions. He had heard stories of healings. He had buried miracles more times than he could count. Most of them collapsed under scrutiny. That was why the Archdiocese trusted him. At 58 years old, with nearly 40 years in service, Father Hayes was known for one thing above all else: skepticism. He did not chase signs. He documented claims, analyzed testimony, and quietly closed cases that others wanted to turn into spectacles. So when Emily Morgan called the parish office and asked for help, Father Hayes almost declined. Almost. What stopped him were the drawings. Emily mailed copies before the visit. They arrived in a plain envelope, unmarked. Father Hayes spread them across his desk and stared. He didn't know what he was looking at. But he knew what he wasn't. These were not devotional images, not stylized saints, not the exaggerated iconography of religious art. They were faces, ordinary, human, and disturbingly consistent. Each man appeared to be between 30 and 35 years old. Each expression carried the same calm, an absence of ego, an absence of urgency, and the eyes. That was what unsettled him. They did not look outward. They looked inward. As if the person being drawn was aware of something, the viewer was not. On September 26th, Father Hayes arrived at the Morgan home. The moment he stepped inside, Noah appeared at the end of the hallway, holding a thick stack of papers against his chest. He did not hesitate. He walked directly toward the priest and extended the drawings. "These are for you," Noah said. Father Hayes knelt instinctively, meeting the child at eye level. "Thank you," he replied gently. As he flipped through the drawings, something cold passed through him. Not fear, recognition, not of the faces, but of the intent behind them. "Do you know who these men are?" Father Hayes asked. Noah shook his head. "I know who one of them is," he said, "but he doesn't want his name used." Father Hayes felt his throat tighten. "Why not?" Noah looked at him, confused by the question. "Because names make crowds," he answered, "and crowds change things." That sentence did not belong to a 5-year-old. During the conversation that followed, Noah spoke calmly. About a man who worked with wood, who lived simply, who refused money, who carried scars he never showed unless asked. "He helps people without being seen," Noah said, "and that's how he wants it." Father Hayes asked careful questions. Noah did not contradict himself once. When Emily mentioned that Noah woke every night at exactly 3:21 a.m., Father Hayes stiffened. "Always the same time?" he asked. "Yes," Emily replied, "and he says he hears a voice." Father Hayes closed his notebook. This was no longer a pastoral conversation. It was a case, and for the first time in decades, Father Jonathan Hayes decided not to dismiss one. Father Hayes did not rush to conclusions. If anything, he slowed everything down. Over the next 2 weeks, he spoke with Emily and David almost daily. He reviewed Noah's drawings repeatedly, sometimes late into the night. He listened to recorded statements Emily had begun saving, short voice notes capturing Noah's exact words, recorded at the moment he spoke them. Patterns emerged, not emotional ones, linguistic ones. Noah did not speak randomly. He did not improvise. He repeated phrases with the same structure, the same cadence, the same internal logic. When Father Hayes asked Noah to repeat certain sentences days later, the child did so word for word, without hesitation. That alone was unusual. But what truly changed the direction of the case happened one quiet afternoon in early October. Emily was washing dishes when she heard Noah speaking softly in his room. Not whispering, reciting. She paused, dried her hands, and stood outside the door. The words were not English. They weren't Latin either. They flowed harshly at first, then softened, consonants folding into one another in a way Emily had never heard. She recorded 30 seconds on her phone. That recording would later be played dozens of times by experts. But even before analysis, one thing was obvious. This was not imitation. Children mimic sounds they hear on television or at church. But Noah's speech carried grammar, structure, intent. When Father Hayes listened to the recording, he felt something close to dread. He did not recognize the language, but he recognized age. This was not modern. This was old, painfully old. He contacted a colleague at Columbia University, a child development psychologist named Dr. Rachel Bennett. Dr. Bennett reviewed Noah's case for 2 weeks. She interviewed Emily and David separately. She observed Noah drawing, speaking, and listening. She reviewed his exposure to religious material, media, and schooling. Her report was precise and unsettling. No evidence of coaching, no evidence of manipulation, no signs of fantasy dissociation. And then the sentence that Father Hayes read 3 times. The subject's cognitive expressions suggest retrieval, not invention. When Father Hayes asked what that meant, Dr. Bennett answered carefully. "It means he is not creating these ideas," she said. "He is accessing them." By mid-October, the case had crossed a line. It was no longer psychological. It was no longer pastoral. It had become something else entirely. And Noah, unaware of the weight surrounding him, said only one thing. "I'm running out of time." Emily Morgan knew the moment she agreed that nothing would ever feel normal again. The decision did not come easily. For nights, she lay awake listening to Noah's breathing, replaying every word he had spoken, every drawing he had made, every warning he had repeated with growing urgency. "He doesn't want to be found." "But I have to find him." Those sentences echoed in her mind. Emily was not reckless. She was not chasing miracles. She was a teacher, trained to protect children, not expose them. But she had reached a point where refusing Noah felt more dangerous than listening to him. "If this comes from God," she finally told Father Hayes during a late-night call, "then God will show us the way." And so the search began. Starting on October 14th, 2024, Emily and David took Noah out every afternoon after school. No press, no announcements, no cameras, just the 3 of them walking. They moved through Midtown first, crowded sidewalks, office workers rushing home, tourists staring up at buildings they'd already photographed 100 times. Noah held his mother's hand tightly and scanned faces. Not nervously, methodically. Emily noticed something strange almost immediately. Noah never hesitated. He did not squint. He did not lean closer. He did not ask to stop. He simply looked. And when a face wasn't right, he shook his head once and kept walking. Day after day, the pattern repeated. They walked through pedestrian plazas, along avenues, past churches and storefronts and subway entrances. Nothing. 11 days passed. David began to doubt. Emily began to fear she had made a mistake. But Noah never questioned the process. On the 12th day, October 25th, just after 6 p.m., they walked near 5th Avenue, heading towards St. Patrick's Cathedral. The sky was dimming. Street lights flickered on. The city softened into evening. And then Noah stopped. Not slowly, abruptly. His grip on Emily's hand tightened with unexpected strength. Emily turned toward him. "Noah?" she asked. He didn't answer. He was staring at an elderly pretzel vendor sitting beside his cart. The man appeared ordinary, 70, maybe older, weathered face, wool coat buttoned too tightly. Noah released Emily's hand. Before she could stop him, he stepped forward and asked a question no child could invent. "Do you know the man with the scarred hands?" The vendor's face changed instantly. The smile faded. His eyes filled with tears. "Yes," the man said softly. "I do." And in that moment, Emily understood. The search was over. The old man's name was Henry Lawson. He had lived in New York his entire life, worked 2 jobs most of it. buried more people than he could count. He was not a man given to fantasy. When Noah asked his question, Henry did not hesitate because he was confused. He hesitated because he was remembering. "I didn't think anyone else knew," Henry said quietly, his voice trembling as he leaned closer to the boy. "I didn't think anyone would ever ask." Emily stepped forward instinctively, placing a hand on Noah's shoulder. "What man?" she asked carefully. Henry swallowed. "The carpenter," he said. "He never told me his name." Henry explained that 3 months earlier, his wife Maria had been dying. Late-stage cancer. Doctors had stopped treatment. Hospice paperwork had already been signed. "One night in August," Henry said, "someone knocked on our door." It was late. The man stood there calmly, dressed simply, his hands rough with work. "He said he heard someone needed help," Henry recalled. "I never asked how he knew." The man went inside. He sat beside Maria's bed. He placed his hands on her. And he prayed. Not in English, not in Latin, in a language Henry had never heard, but one that made the room feel heavy and still. The next morning, Maria woke up without pain. Within days, she was eating again. 3 weeks later, tests at a hospital in Westchester County showed the tumor had vanished. "The doctors said it made no sense," Henry whispered. "But I know what I saw." Henry looked at Noah. "That man had scars in his palms," he said. "Like nails went straight through." Noah listened silently. Then he reached out and took Henry's hand. "He doesn't want people looking for him," Noah said gently. "But God asked me to." Henry exhaled, as if releasing a secret he had carried alone. "He lives in Yonkers," Henry said. "Works in a small shop. Almost never leaves." Emily and David exchanged a look they would later describe as terror mixed with relief. Because now the impossible had an address. And Noah did not smile. He only said, "Please take me to him." The next morning, October 26th, was unusually quiet. The sky was overcast, the air heavy, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Emily, David, Noah, Father Hayes, and Henry Lawson drove north toward Yonkers just after sunrise. No one spoke much during the drive. Noah sat in the back seat, hands folded in his lap, staring out the window. Not nervous, not excited, prepared. Henry guided them through narrow residential streets until they reached a modest neighborhood that looked like every other working-class block in the city. At 9:48 a.m., they stopped in front of a small, unmarked carpentry shop. No sign. No business hours. Just an old wooden door and windows covered with plain white curtains. Henry stepped out first. "This is it," he said quietly. He knocked 3 times. Nothing happened. A minute passed. Then 2. Emily felt Noah's hand tighten around hers, stronger than she expected. "He's inside," Noah whispered. "He's afraid, because he knows what's coming." After nearly 5 minutes, the door slowly opened. A man stood in the doorway. He was tall, with shoulder-length dark brown hair and a thick beard streaked faintly with grey. He wore worn jeans and a white cotton shirt dusted with sawdust. His eyes were golden brown, and they were tired, deeply tired. Noah released his mother's hand and walked forward. The man knelt immediately, lowering himself to the child's level, as if this was not the first time he had done so. For nearly a full minute, no one spoke. Then Noah reached out and gently took the man's hands. He turned them over. There were scars, perfectly circular, centered in both palms. Father Hayes felt his knees weaken. David instinctively pulled out his phone to record. The screen went black. Battery, 89%. The device shut off completely. "Why did you search for me, little one?" the man asked softly, his accent impossible to place. Noah answered without hesitation. "Because people need to know you never left," he said. "That you still help, even when you don't want to be seen." The man closed his eyes briefly. "I am not who you think I am," he said calmly. "I am only a man who works with wood. These scars," he added, gently pulling his hands back, "they came from an accident years ago." Henry stepped forward. "You healed my wife," he said. "The doctors can't explain it." The man shook his head slowly. "I prayed," he replied. "Your faith healed her, not me." Father Hayes asked permission to speak. The man nodded once. "My name is Elias," he said, and he stepped aside, inviting them in. Elias's workshop was almost empty. A single wooden workbench stood against the far wall. Old tools hung neatly in place. The scent of fresh-cut wood mixed with dust and oil. There were no photographs, no paperwork, no signs of a personal life. A narrow cot rested in the corner, its blanket folded with military precision. Elias closed the door behind them. The sound echoed longer than it should have. Father Hayes observed quietly. The man spoke calmly, answered politely, and never once raised his voice. But there was something unsettling in his presence. Not menace, not power. Restraint. When asked how long he had lived there, Elias answered without hesitation. 3 years in this place, he said, but I've been in America much longer. Where are you from? Emily asked. Elias lowered his eyes. I was born far from here, he said, in a land that no longer exists in the form I remember. His English was flawless, too flawless, yet at times his phrasing felt old, as if borrowed from another century. When Father Hayes asked about it, Elias smiled faintly. I learned language from scholars, he said. I suppose I kept the older forms. The tests began 3 days later, October 29th. Elias agreed on one condition: no publicity, no media, no spectacle. Father Hayes coordinated with Columbia University. The first examination came from Dr. Daniel Mercer, a linguist specializing in ancient Semitic languages. Elias was asked to read and translate texts in Biblical Hebrew, then Imperial Aramaic, then Koine Greek. Dr. Mercer stopped taking notes halfway through. Elias wasn't translating, he was correcting. When asked to recite the Lord's Prayer, Elias spoke in Galilean Aramaic, a dialect extinct for nearly 2,000 years. His pronunciation was exact. There is no academic path to this level of fluency, Dr. Mercer wrote later. This is not learned language. This is lived language. On November 3rd, blood samples were taken. A B negative, rare. But that was not what disturbed Dr. Victoria Hayes, the hematologist overseeing the analysis. The cellular markers didn't align with Elias's apparent age. It's as if the body has undergone cycles of regeneration inconsistent with known biology, she wrote. Then came the scars. Under ultraviolet light, Dr. Andrew Sterling, a Near East archaeologist, examined the wounds. These are not industrial injuries, he concluded. They match Roman crucifixion patterns. Iron nails, precise placement, ancient trauma. Science had not found proof. It had lost control. And Elias said nothing. Elias did not argue with the results. He did not defend himself. He did not attempt to explain what science could not. When Father Hayes showed him the reports, Elias read them quietly, then placed the pages back on the table as if they belonged to someone else. These things don't define me, he said simply, but the world was already defining him. Despite the agreement for privacy, information began to leak. At first it was subtle, a whispered comment between academics, a photograph shared privately. a message forwarded one time too many. By November 17th, a small group of professors had seen the images of Elias's scars. By November 22nd, the name the Carpenter of New York was circulating online. People began to arrive in Yonkers. Some prayed. Some demanded proof. Some simply wanted to see. Elias was gone before the crowds reached his door. Henry Lawson confirmed it. On November 15th, Elias had closed the workshop, packed nothing, and left behind only a single handwritten note. It was written in Aramaic. Father Hayes translated it himself. The truth needs no spectacle. Love seeks no worship. There were no fingerprints, no travel records, no security footage showing him leaving. It was as if he had simply stepped out of the timeline. Father Hayes held a press statement on November 29th inside the Archdiocese offices. He presented the reports. He chose his words carefully. "We have documented a case that challenges conventional explanation," he said. "We do not claim divinity, but we cannot dismiss what we have witnessed." While the world debated, Noah became ill. Noah's fever came suddenly. On December 4th, his temperature spiked above 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Emily noticed first. He was shivering, his skin hot to the touch, his eyes unfocused. Within hours, the house filled with the quiet urgency of medical equipment, whispered conversations, and the dull fear every parent recognizes instantly. Doctors ruled out infection. Blood tests showed nothing conclusive. Medication lowered the fever slightly, but it always returned. And then Noah began to speak, not in English, not in the language he used at school or at home. He spoke in the same ancient tongue Emily had once recorded in secret. The words came slowly at first, then with rhythm, then with certainty. Dr. Daniel Mercer was called in the middle of the night. He listened to the recordings over the phone, then arrived in person before dawn. His hands trembled as he translated. "He will return when the crowd is ready," Mercer said quietly, "at the place of the mother who weeps for her children." Emily felt her chest tighten. Father Hayes knew immediately what it meant. St. Patrick's Cathedral, dedicated to the faith's most enduring symbols of compassion, sacrifice, and sorrow. For 3 days, Noah drifted in and out of consciousness. When he was awake, he repeated the same phrases, always the same wording, always the same cadence. On December 8th, at exactly 2:09 a.m., the fever broke, abruptly. No gradual cooling, no medical explanation. Noah opened his eyes and looked directly at his mother. "He spoke to me," he said. Emily held her breath. "He says," Noah continued, his voice weak but clear, "on January 12th, 2025, at the Cathedral, he will show the truth." He paused. "But after that," he whispered, "he will leave forever." The message spread faster than anyone could stop it, and the world began to move. January 12th, 2025. New York had not seen a gathering like this in decades. By early afternoon, entire blocks surrounding St. Patrick's Cathedral were closed. Police barriers stretched across Fifth Avenue. Helicopters hovered at a distance, careful not to break the fragile calm that had settled over the crowd. By evening, more than 120,000 people stood in silence. Some prayed, some filmed, some simply waited. Emily stood near the steps of the cathedral with Noah beside her, wrapped in a heavy coat. He looked smaller than he had weeks before, exhausted, pale but calm. Too calm. At exactly 6:33 p.m., a ripple moved through the crowd. People turned, a path opened, and Elias appeared. No announcement, no procession, no protection. He walked slowly through the crowd, wearing the same simple carpenter's clothes, worn jeans, a plain shirt, his hands visible. As he passed, a woman in a wheelchair reached out and touched the edge of his sleeve. Her name was Grace. She had lived with advanced multiple sclerosis for 6 years. Witnesses later confirmed what happened next. Grace stood. She let go of her crutches, and for the first time in years she took a step, then another. The crowd gasped. Phones shook in trembling hands. Within hours the footage would circle the world. Elias entered the cathedral and sat on the steps near the altar. No microphone, no amplification, and yet his voice carried. "I did not come to be worshipped," he said, "but to remind you that God never abandoned his children. Every act of true love is my presence. Do not search for me in temples of gold. Search for me in the hungry, in the sick, in the forgotten." For 47 minutes he spoke, moving seamlessly between English, Aramaic, and Latin. At 7:14 p.m., something impossible happened. A powerful scent filled the cathedral. Not incense, not flowers. Later analysis confirmed the source could not be identified. More than 400 people reported sudden relief from pain, illness, or long-term conditions in that moment. Elias stood. He looked once toward Noah. Then he spoke his final words. "Love one another, as I have loved you." He walked toward a side exit. Security cameras showed him entering a narrow corridor. There was no other exit. Yet he never appeared at the far end. He did not flee. He did not hide. He vanished. Weeks later, an archaeological team in Jerusalem reportedly uncovered a parchment beneath an ancient site on the Mount of Olives. Carbon dating placed it in the 1st century. Its contents described the cathedral gathering with unsettling precision. Genetic analysis of Elias's blood revealed markers science could not explain. Noah no longer draws faces. He lives a quiet, normal life in New York. But every year, on January 12th, for exactly 11 minutes, the same unexplained scent returns to St. Patrick's Cathedral, and along the streets between Manhattan and the northern boroughs, people still report a quiet Carpenter, helping, asking nothing. When asked his name, he always answers the same way. "It doesn't matter who I am. What matters is that you love."